Soul Streaming Entry 22. Survival can't kill my childlike wonder. A living, breathing, audio, and written experience by Sim. It makes me smile sometimes how much childlike wonder still lives inside of me after everything I've experienced. And honestly, that surprises me, but it doesn't, because I understand why so many people lose access to that part of themselves while moving through life. I understand why people become hardened. I understand why people stop believing in softness, in magic, in possibility, in love, in play. Life can feel heavy as fuck sometimes. It can feel repetitive, painful, disappointing, lonely, unfair, and exhausting. Some people only know survival. Some people only know pressure. Some people learned very early that being open hearted came with pain attached to it. So they slowly started closing the door to the very parts of themselves that once made them feel alive. But honestly, the older I've gotten, the more I've realized my childlike wonder is probably the main thing people can't quite put their finger on when it comes to me. It's the reason I keep finding myself on roads less traveled in my reality. It's the reason I'm willing to walk away from things that no longer feel aligned, even when it would be easier to stay. It's the reason I'm not afraid to reinvent myself over and over again if it means keeping that spark inside of me alive. I don't care how many fucking times I have to begin again. I don't care how many versions of myself I outgrow. If something inside of me lights me up, expands, softens, or comes alive, I've learned to pay attention to it, even in dark seasons, especially in dark seasons. I think that's why I move through life the way I do now. There's a part of me that genuinely believes life is meant to be participated with, not just survived. So even when I don't fully know how something is going to unfold, my spirit still responds with, shit, let's find out. And strangely enough, I think choosing to follow that feeling has led me down paths that ended up feeling far more rewarding than the safer, more predictable roads I was taught to follow in the first place. I think people misunderstand what I mean when I say childlike wonder because they associate it with being childish, naive, immature, unrealistic, or disconnected from reality. But honestly, that was never what it meant to me. The older I've gotten, the more I've realized children naturally embody qualities that many adults slowly disconnect from through survival, conditioning, disappointment, shame, pressure, and fear. Children are deeply present, deeply curious, deeply emotionally responsive. They ask questions naturally. They imagine naturally. They engage with life naturally. They recover from moments quickly. They believe possibility exists before life convinces them to narrow themselves down in what feels realistic. For real, I think there's something incredibly sacred about that openness. Not because children are unaware of pain, but because their hearts haven't fully hardened around it yet. Their ego hasn't completely taken over yet. There's still a purity in the way they participate with life, a willingness to explore, trust, imagine, create, feel, and remain emotionally available to the moment they're in. And I think somewhere along the way, many adults stop practicing with life and start only protecting themselves from it. But I also understand the people who choose to keep going anyway, the people who somehow push through the bitterness without allowing it to become their entire identity, the people who still choose laughter after heartbreak, the people who still choose curiosity after disappointment, the people who still choose to believe that something beautiful can exist here, even after life has shown them some ugly shit. Because I truly think there's a phase on this journey where you have to walk through the illusion that life is only suffering. You have to meet the parts of yourself that feel abandoned, angry, ashamed, disconnected, hopeless, resentful, or exhausted. And somewhere in the middle of moving through all of that, you either decide to stay there or you decide to keep going deeper. I truly believe that love heals all. But I get how people can misunderstand the statement. I'm not talking about pretending pain doesn't exist. I'm not talking about bypassing grief, trauma, hurt, disappointment, or reality. I'm talking about choosing not to abandon yourself while moving through it. I'm talking about the kind of love that stays present with you when life feels ugly. The kind of love that lets transformation continue instead of stopping at shame. Because shame makes people freeze. Shame makes people believe their pain is who they are instead of something they're experiencing. And once people identify with the pain completely, they stop moving. They stop trusting themselves. They stop allowing life to meet them differently. They stop allowing love to reach the wounded places because they secretly believe those places make them unworthy of receiving it. Surviving yourself. I think that's why childlike wonder became such a missing piece for me while healing. Not because it erased my wounds, my trauma, my grief, or the generational cycles I became conscious of. but because it gave me another way to move through them besides only surviving them. I think so many people inherit generations of survival without ever inheriting permission to stay connected to softness, play, imagination, curiosity, or emotional openness at the same time. The wounds get passed down, the pressure gets passed down, the fear gets passed down, but somewhere along the way, the wander often gets left behind. And honestly, I think that's what I started noticing within myself. The deeper I went into healing, shadow work, self awareness, and consciousness, the more I realized I couldn't only focus on my pain. I couldn't only focus on fixing myself. Because eventually, healing started feeling incomplete without reconnecting to the parts of me that still wanted to feel alive too. The parts of me that still wanted to laugh, explore, imagine, create, play, rest, dream, and remain emotionally open to life. To me, children represent a kind of openness that exists before heavy conditioning fully hardens someone. Their ego hasn't completely taken over yet. They're still deeply sensitive, imaginative, emotionally responsive, curious, trusting, and present with life. They still believe possibility exists naturally. They don't fully separate themselves from wonder yet. And honestly, I think survival conditioning slowly teaches people to disconnect from those parts of themselves in order to endure life more comfortably. People learn how to suppress softness, imagination, emotional sensitivity, play, and curiosity because survival convinces people those things are distractions instead of realizing they may actually be a part of what keeps the spirit alive while moving through difficult realities. I know for sure now, reconnecting with my childlike wonder felt so healing for me. It wasn't about escaping reality, it was about learning how to hold both the depth and the softness, the wounds and the wonder, the grief and the aliveness, the healing and the play. I think we were always meant to remain connected to the parts of ourselves that still know how to experience life fully while we're here. And while those things may help people survive difficult seasons, eventually you reach a point where you have to ask yourself if you're actually living or just managing your existence. Because there's a difference. One feels contracted, the other feels open. One feels like constantly bracing for impact, the other feels like finally exhaling back into yourself. The return of my inner child. At first, connecting with my inner child felt foreign. It honestly felt like I was getting to know myself all over again. Then, over time, it started feeling like a distant relative who would randomly pop in and visit every now and then. We knew of each other, but the trust wasn't fully there yet. But the more I softened toward myself, the more that relationship deepened. We became closer, the trust grew, my heart opened, my eyes opened, and eventually, I realized my childlike wonder was never gone. It was just buried underneath survival, shame, pressure, conditioning, and the version of me that thought life was only meant to be endured. Childlike wonder slowly became one of the most healing parts of my journey. Children naturally move toward love, play, curiosity, imagination, forgiveness, and openness, even after they cry, even after they fall, even after they hurt themselves. There's still a part of them that wants to get back up and experience life again. That softness is natural before survival teaches people to suppress it. Somewhere along my own journey, after all the shadow work, all the tower moments, ego deaths, transitions, grief, and the questions, I realized I wasn't trying to become somebody new. I was trying to reconnect with a part of me that still knew how to love life without needing it to be perfect first. Children don't sit around questioning whether they deserve joy. They naturally move toward what lights them up and all the parts of them that still believes there's something beautiful worth experiencing. And I see that's what moved me so deeply once I started reconnecting with my own inner child. Not because I was trying to become childish, but because I realized how much of my softness had been buried underneath survival. The more I allowed myself to soften, the more I realized my childlike wonder was patiently waiting underneath the noise, underneath the pressure, underneath the identities I outgrew, and the version of me that thought healing only had to look serious and painful all the time. And once I stopped approaching life like a constant emergency to survive, I started noticing how much beauty had been trying to reach me the entire time. The birds outside my window, the wind, nature, laughing until my stomach hurts, following random curiosities, sitting with my thoughts, dreaming bigger, resting without guilt, letting myself imagine impossible things again. And slowly, I realized those moments weren't random at all. They were reconnecting me back to myself, back to the parts of me survival couldn't fully destroy, back to the version of me that still knew how to participate with life instead of only protecting myself from it. And honestly, I think that's what surprised me the most. The things that ended up healing me weren't always the deepest conversations, the hardest realizations, or the heaviest breakthroughs. Sometimes healing looked like allowing myself to feel alive again in small, ordinary moments I used to overlook, participation instead of powerlessness. Throughout my journey, I stopped viewing life through the lens of powerlessness and started viewing it through the lens of a creator and something I was participating in. Not because painful things magically disappeared, but because I realized how much power exists in the way we meet ourselves while moving through life. That's why I always return to the idea of free will. Because even within the themes our souls may feel connected to, the generational patterns we inherit, the wounds we experience, and the contracts we came here to explore, there are still choices being made every single day. I truly believe we arrive here carrying certain themes tied to our journey. Themes connected to love, abandonment, trust, shame, power, self worth, grief, forgiveness, balance, survival, connection, freedom, or transformation. Almost like deeper soul level lessons woven into the fabric of our lives before we ever fully become conscious of them. And once we incarnate here, most of us don't remember those themes consciously as they begin unfolding through our experiences, relationships, families, hardships, desires, and triggers. We just feel them playing out in real time. That is why certain patterns can feel so deeply woven into people's lives and bloodlines. Some people are carrying generational pain that existed long before they arrived here. Some are learning how to break cycles. Some are learning how to stop choosing survival over peace. Others are learning boundaries, softness, trust, vulnerability, or self love for the first time in generations. And some are learning how to become the alchemists of their own life, how to sit with energy instead of allowing it to consume them, how to transmute pain into wisdom, grief into compassion, endings into transformation, and suffering into deeper self awareness. But even within those themes, there is still free will. There's still the choice to remain unconscious inside the pattern or become awakened to it. The choice to keep identifying with survival or start building a relationship with peace. The choice to continue abandoning yourself every time life gets uncomfortable or finally sit with yourself long enough to hear what your pain has been trying to communicate all along. Because I don't think healing happens by pretending difficult themes don't exist. I think healing happens when we become conscious enough to stop letting those themes completely define who we are. This is where childlike wonder becomes so important within all of this, too. Because even while carrying certain soul themes, wounds, generational patterns, or difficult seasons, childlike wonder is what keeps people open to possibility while moving through them. It's what allows someone to believe movement is still possible even before they fully understand how they're going to get there. Children naturally embody that energy. They believe they can become anything, create anything, imagine anything. They fall down and still get back up, believing life can meet them differently. And somewhere along the way, survival conditioning teaches adults to over identify with their current circumstances instead of remaining open to what else might be possible beyond them. That's something I've noticed deeply within myself, even during uncertain seasons. Even when I don't fully know how I'm going to move through something yet, there's still a deeper part of me that believes I will. Not because I'm disconnected from reality, but because I no longer see my current circumstances as the full definition of what's possible for my life. And I think that belief alone becomes a form of life force, a form of resilience, a form of spiritual openness that allows transformation to continue unfolding instead of collapsing into hopelessness. I think people misunderstand what awakening actually feels like. A lot of people think awakening is all love and light and magical synchronicities. But sometimes awakening feels like realizing how often you've been participating in your own suffering because familiarity felt safer than change. Sometimes awakening feels like seeing how tightly you've been gripping identities, routines, relationships, environments, or beliefs that no longer fit who you're becoming. Sometimes awakening feels uncomfortable because you start recognizing that life keeps presenting doorways to you, but fear keeps convincing you not to walk through them. That's why I always ask myself questions like, where am I out to get myself? Where am I ignoring my intuition? Where am I choosing fear over expansion? Where am I reopening the same wound because the pain feels familiar? Where am I rejecting the very thing that could free me because it disrupts my comfort? Those questions aren't about blaming myself for being human. They're about becoming more conscious while I'm here. Because once you become aware of your patterns, you begin realizing how much power exists inside your choices, your perspective, your willingness to surrender, and your openness to experience life differently. This is why I naturally move through life with faith, even during difficult seasons, not pretending everything feels good all the time, but a deeper knowing that movement is always possible, that healing is always possible, that transformation is always possible, that people are not nearly as trapped as they believe they are. Because the moment awareness enters the room, possibility enters with it. The moment someone becomes willing to observe themselves honestly, instead of only identifying with the pain, something starts shifting internally. Imagination is life force. Children fascinate me so much now. Children can turn almost anything into a game. Give them a cardboard box, and suddenly it becomes a spaceship, a castle, a restaurant, a secret hideout, a race car. Give them a stick, and imagination fills in the rest. They don't need endless resources to access wonder because wonder was never tied to the resources in the first place. It was tied to their openness and imagination, their ability to fully be present with what's in front of them and create from there. I think people would be shocked if they realize how deeply imagination is tied to manifestation, not in the watered down internet version of manifestation where people think it's just about repeating affirmations or pretending pain doesn't exist, but in the real sense of allowing yourself to see beyond your current circumstances, allowing yourself to dream beyond what your physical reality currently reflects back to you. Because every time I've expanded in my life, it started in my imagination first. It started the moment I gave myself permission to believe something different could exist for me before I had evidence of it in my hands. I can feel how true that's become within my own life. The more I allow myself to dream, play, imagine, create, and honor the simple things that genuinely light me up, the more energy I seem to unlock within myself. Small things light me up. Sitting outside, watching the birds, rearranging my space, listening to the wind, laughing until my cheeks hurt, writing, resting, following a random curiosity, exploring adventures. And every time I honor those moments instead of dismissing them as insignificant, it's like more life force energy opens up inside of me. More clarity, more creativity, more softness, more space. It feels like those moments become portals that reconnect me back to myself. I think what suppresses people the most is the belief that they're running out of time. People move through life carrying overflowing plates, overcommitting themselves to responsibilities, survival, routines, expectations, other people's needs, and constant pressure until they can no longer even hear themselves anymore. Their inner child keeps trying to get their attention, but they've become so disconnected from stillness that they don't know how to listen. And honestly, I understand it because survival mode convinces people that rest, play, imagination, joy, curiosity, and softness are luxuries instead of necessities. It teaches people to treat those parts of themselves as distractions instead of doorways. Because the truth is, life will always have contrast. There will always be endings, discomfort, uncertainty, pauses, loss, confusion, and moments where things don't make sense yet. But I no longer look at those parts as proof that life is against me. I see them as invitations to participate differently, invitations to trust differently, invitations to soften instead of harden, invitations to remain open instead of collapsing. That's the real shift that happened for me. I stopped equating suffering as proof that I was growing, and I started allowing joy, wonder, rest, play, and love to become part of the healing too. One of the strongest revelations I've come to on this journey is that returning to your childlike wonder requires more than just surrender. It requires balance within yourself, a real harmony between your feminine and masculine energy, between softness and structure, between flow and grounding, between intuition and action. Because when one side completely overpowers the other, you end up living in extremes. You either become too hardened to stay open or too untethered to feel safe. But when those energies begin working together instead of against each other, something shifts internally. You stop viewing rest, play, softness, imagination, and joy as distractions from life and start realizing they are a part of what nourishes your life force in the first place. I've also noticed how many people bypass the needs of their inner child by turning survival into a personality trait. There's always another excuse, another responsibility, another bill, another obligation, another reason why joy has to wait. Play becomes something people think they have to earn instead of something that should naturally exist throughout their lives. People are taught to work hard first, sacrifice first, exhaust themselves first, and maybe if there's enough time left over afterward, then they can finally rest, laugh, explore themselves, or enjoy being alive. But for most people, that later either never comes or only arrives in small temporary moments before they throw themselves right back into depletion again. I know a lot of that comes from conditioning passed down through generations. People inherit survival mindsets from parents who inherited them from their parents before them. Hustle culture becomes normalized. Burnout becomes normalized. Self sacrifice becomes normalized. Being disconnected from yourself becomes normalized. Meanwhile, the inner child keeps trying to get your attention through exhaustion, frustration, numbness, creativity, longing, curiosity, or the quiet feeling that something inside of you is still waiting to be lived. But when people are conditioned to believe their worth is tied only to productivity, suffering, or constant responsibility, they end up treating their own life force like it matters less than everything else they give their energy to. My legacy thread. My childlike wonder slowly found its way back to me, not because life suddenly became easier, but because I stopped abandoning myself every time life became difficult. I stopped treating pain like proof that I had to disconnect from softness, joy, imagination, or love. And the more I stopped identifying only with survival, the more space I created within myself to actually experience life again, instead of constantly bracing against it. Once I shifted, I stopped seeing my joy, my rest, my wonder, my curiosity, and my peace as things that belonged at the bottom of my priority list. I stopped treating play like a reward I had to earn through exhaustion. Because at the end of the day, I am the creator of my life. If I keep telling myself I don't have time to nourish my spirit, then I'm the one choosing not to create that space. And the more I started honoring the parts of myself that felt alive, the more open I became to receiving life differently. Not from depletion, not from survival, but from fullness. A whisper for you. Maybe your childlike wonder was never asking you to become naive again. Maybe it was asking you to become open again. Open to possibility. Open to softness. Open to curiosity. Open to the parts of yourself that still know how to feel alive, even after everything you've experienced. Survival may have taught you how to protect yourself, but your spirit still deserves the chance to participate with life too. And maybe that's the real healing. Not becoming somebody new, but reconnecting with the parts of yourself that survival couldn't kill. Here are your journal prompts for this week's entry. Number one, what parts of myself feel most alive when I stop prioritizing survival over presence? Number two, where in my life have I been overriding what genuinely lights me up because fear, conditioning, responsibility, or familiarity feels safer? Number three, what did play, wonder, imagination, curiosity, or softness naturally look like for me before life taught me to suppress those parts of myself? Number four, in what ways have I mistaken emotionally hardening for maturity, growth, or protection? Number five, if I fully trusted that life could meet me differently, what choice, desire, curiosity, or version of myself would I finally allow myself to explore? Thank you for witnessing this soul stream. Return to it whenever you need to come home to yourself. Until next time, stay soft, stay true, and keep streaming your soul your way. Love, Sim.